Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the OTTRED Spotlight podcast. In this series, I'm going to be focusing on innovation within the broadcast media and specifically the OTT sector of the broad horizon of topics that all of those now cover. I'm going to have a series of guests with me that will represent a spectrum of interests and perspectives when it comes to the market, the experience they've got, and the perspective they've got on where we are heading as an industry. Today, I'm extremely proud and pleased to introduce somebody to you who I'm lucky enough to have known for a few years. We met each other first face-to-face at IBC, where we hosted an event and Greg was one of the attendees. That was my first IBC, so Greg was on the inaugural outing. Inaugural is probably an appropriate word because it was literally on a boat. But Greg Willis, it's a pleasure to introduce you to the OTTRED Spotlight podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, not only about the topics that I've mentioned around innovation in the sector, but what I'd really like to start off with first, Greg, is an introduction for the people who maybe don't know you, the prolific career that you've had in the kind of media and broadcast space, so that we can lay the foundations of things that we're going to talk about in the rest of the podcast. Greg, welcome to the OTTRED Spotlight podcast.
Great, Chris. Thank you. Well, wonderful to be here. Excited to be part of this. As you know, I'm a big fan of what you're doing and what your group is doing at Red Holt. So thank you for this opportunity. So quick introduction, Greg Willis, longtime industry veteran of media and entertainment, as well as telco. I've worked for some of the most formidable brands in senior sales, marketing, business development roles, everything from IBM to Food Network that actually helped start back in the day, HBO, Liberty Media. So I've worked both on the media and content side and the technology side, a number of streaming companies, Endeavor, one of the early ones back in 2000 called IVT. So I've been there the early days of the streaming business. I've also worked for significant technology companies. I mentioned IBM, Ascent Media, which was part of Liberty, HP, as well as a number of other ones, all in sales and marketing leadership. Was also in the satellite business for a while, working for Pan Am Sat. So I've touched different parts of the media, both the sales and marketing and distribution of content, as well as the delivery and workflow components of it. And see streaming as a real opportunity as everyone's moving to the cloud to move their production and distribution to the cloud. So very involved. I've also been very involved in new technology. IVT, as I mentioned, was one of the early streamers in 2000. Feels like a lifetime ago. We were one of the early ones to synchronize video and text together. So I'm always focused on working for companies that are very innovative and pushing the envelope to help deliver a better experience for consumers.
What I'm really looking forward to in this episode, Greg, episode 1 of a series that's all about innovation, is the fact that you've seen a number of different frontiers, and as you've just said, from a number of different perspectives in terms of the providers and contributing entities to what's been happening. Just before we get into what's ahead for the broadcast industry at the moment, I want to take some time to reflect on frontiers, technological frontiers that you've seen coming, what it's been like when they've arrived, and what kind of change you've seen. Which one do you think was, of all of the different revolutions within the industry, which one do you think was the most prolific when it comes to the amount of change that it actually had on the broadcast sector?
I think the ability to effectively deliver a quality video signal. I mean, in some regards, streaming, the early days brought forward content that couldn't make it onto broadcast. And whether you were a small sports, university that couldn't get broadcast onto a large, whether it's Fox or Sky or ESPN, it brought forward content. I think because the cost of producing and distributing via streaming is much lower, it brings other categories to the space, whether it's fitness, whether it's shopping, whether it's other. In terms of the primary content entertainment, it's enabling the consumer to have massive amounts of content. The challenges we all see today is the ability to navigate and define content is extremely challenging, which I think brings up analytics, without a doubt, is an area that has to evolve. There's so much data coming out of streaming. AI, whether it's helping in the workflow, it will definitely help in the digital workflow. to automate and process some of that content faster, which will bring the cost down, which every big operator needs to do because there's a big focus on profitability. You know, the direct to consumer. So how do you deliver a better experience, and how do you use AI and data to deliver content to that consumer that they really want to watch, that creates a better, more sticky experience without offending or you know, delving into the whole privacy issue, right? You want to know all about that user, but there's you know, there's also that give and take in terms of privacy. So I think security is going to be big. The streaming experience has been a big change. The quality you see today, though folks don't use a lot of 4K, it's available. You know, if someone had said 10 years ago you'll have 4K on streaming, they would have thought you were crazy. So you can get the same experience that you get in broadcast in terms of video quality, audio quality. You also get the portability of watching it, you know, on your mobile.
Yeah, Greg, if I'm correct, although the roles that you've had have had an international footprint, you've always been based in the US, and you've always been at the front line when it comes to seeing how the US market reacts to these revolutions and introductions of new technology. How do you think the US compares in terms of its appetite to embrace all of these new technologies in comparison to your experience of some other global regions?
So I think you're correct. I've always been based in New York. That's where I live, is in Connecticut, so in the New York area. In terms of technology, I think today the pressure, you know, there's 3 or 4 things that are key. One, the business is moving direct to consumer. Sports started that, media has now done that. It's transitioning. 2, in terms of security is absolutely paramount. So you control access to your content, but creating the ability to deliver, maybe it's e-commerce. There's a lot of talk about e-commerce. E-commerce has been talked about back in the cable days, 20 years ago. It's been tried. Interactive television was tried. It all shifted when the iPhone arrived. So I think even with whether it's an Android or an iPhone phone, you can get we will enable commerce, and commerce is coming. There are trials. There's going to be a big event on Thursday that Prime's doing here in the US to sort of kick off their commerce applications. But I think consumers, if it's done correctly and elegantly and not obtrusive, commerce can become another revenue stream. So I look at it as another revenue stream. Right now it's subscription, ad sales, and that's pretty much it. You know, product placement in the shows. But if you can add commerce, if you can add other ways to drive or expand the revenue for your service. And the other side of it is every operator, whether you're Disney Plus, whether you're Max, if you're Sky, whoever you may be, you've got to lower your costs, because the costs right now compared to what the delivery revenues are out of whack for streaming versus, I'll call it, traditional linear.
Yeah. What do you think? What's your prediction, Greg, on how that dynamic, that paradigm between cost and the amount of revenue that you can recover from subscribers is going to play out across the course of the next 12 months, for example? Because even over the last 24 months, since those kind of catastrophic Netflix results that we can remember coming out, you know, I think that if you look at Evan Shapiro, for example, the amount of stuff that he produces, amazing stuff into the public domain, it all seems to be about the way that organizations are looking at M&A activity to aggregate the cost base and get more effective, but continually looking at things like subscriber retention, how to eliminate piracy, you know, all of these things that erode their bottom line. Do you think it's just going to continue as it has been for the last couple of years, or do you think it's beginning to plateau out with the M&A activity that we've seen?
I think it's going to continue in some regards. And one of the things, if you think about the traditional television business, go back 20, 30 years, or call it the entertainment business. You created a movie that then ended up on paid television when there were DVDs, and then ended up in broadcast. If you think of the windows, so Warner Brothers could make a movie and sell it and rent it multiple times all the way through. Today, partly because of COVID, things jumped from the theatrical window right into streaming, and you know, they're trying to pull that back a little bit. And then what happened is the big tech folks are now creating content, and have been for the last few years at huge numbers in terms of the investment they're making. So the traditional, the Warner Brothers, the Discoveries, the Foxes pulled back. Now they're actually going back to licensing that to Netflix. I mean, there's shows on Netflix that originated on Showtime or on HBO because they still need that window. So it's the battle of profitability, which they have to get to for Wall Street, to the battle for whether you win the overall viewership. And the big guys, the other thing I would say, and if Evan was on here, he would say the same thing because he says it all the time. Some of the big tech guys, it's not just about the entertainment. It's wait, you have music, wait, you have commerce, wait, you have other things in your capability. I mean, NBA, for example, right now is working on their rights to sell their rights. And the lead in that negotiation is Amazon. Amazon's already brought Thursday Night Football in the U.S. You know, where will we be in 5 years? Will all of sports moved over to Amazon or to Google or another platform or YouTube TV?
Yeah, let's talk about sports for a second, Greg, because, you know, I'm obviously in the Middle East. I'm based in Dubai, and the proximity to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia means that I hear daily about what's happening in terms of all of the gravity that part of the world generates when it comes to sports now and how they're capitalizing on that, monetizing it. Would you agree that sports tends to be a catalyst for these things because it's got such a loyal and huge following? And you're speaking from a position of authority here because you spent time at Endeavour as well. And, you know, in a large part of the Endeavour footprint's all around sports. What's your theory around whether or not sports actually acts as a spearhead catalyst for the progress that we see when it comes to entertainment?
I think it does for a couple of reasons. And I worked for New Lion previously 10 years ago. New Lion was not only in the professional sports, but in the college and university sports, down to very little small schools where it was a very unique deal to get them on the air. But they, you know, we also did the deal for the Ivy Leagues, you know, which was to bring all the U.S. Ivy League schools together under one umbrella for all of their sports. Without a doubt, it's a catalyst. Plus their live events, in addition to, you know, VOD, plus the data and the experience. I mean, New Line was the first who used the opportunity to provide the consumer with multiple cameras. You can click and change cameras when you're watching UFC, above the fight, on the side. So that innovation that will actually benefit other categories of at least live television comes from sports. Sports, you know, right now in the US is I mentioned the Amazon play on one side. On the other side is the regional sports networks, which 10, 15 years ago were some of the most valuable businesses. You know, the networks were worth more than the teams. That's all changed because regional sports networks are, well, now they're either bankrupt or about to go bankrupt again because of issues with streaming and then loss of viewership. And you've got some of the big guys, MSG in New York, Nesson a couple of years ago up in Boston, launched their own direct-to-consumer. They're all going to direct-to-consumer. There's some attempts to try and go to broadcast, but the consumer wants it whenever and wherever. So if they've got their phone and they're not at home, they can still watch the game or listen to the game. So I think it's going through a changing, you know, a period of change. In some cases, the big sports, NFL is doing great. If you call WWE a sport, it's doing gangbusters because of streaming and being streamed internationally, not just here in the US. UFC is the same thing, all direct to consumer outside of the US. So I think the direct to consumer model is where it's going. It's how do you get there by and be profitable. That's one of the challenges.
There's a guy called Dave Lipp, who I know pretty well, who heads up all of the digital stuff for Manchester United. You know, so digital merchandising. And even his job title interests me, Greg. Digital merchandising, because we've known for years, right, that these assets in terms of the sports rights weren't just about the sport. They were actually about all of the physical merchandising before. That's what generates so much of the revenue globally for these big teams and names and sports. But now you've got digital merchandising as well. You know, do you think that the provision of OTT platforms being able or allowing these teams to go direct to consumer is at the heartbeat of that? Is that the nucleus of what digital merchandising is about going forward? Or do you think it's about a wider range of topics?
I think it's without a doubt sports. If you're passionate about your team, if you're a New York Giants fan or a LA Lakers fan or Manchester United, And you can get access to this directly online without a doubt. That's where people are most passionate. But I think it's going to extend, the commerce part is going to extend. I mean, look at what Paramount did last year with Yellowstone. It was a little clunky, but you could go to a site and buy the clothing and things that were worn on the show. And part of it, I think, is the other thing to think about is influencers. If you've got an influencer who's influencing a brand, and that could be a liquor brand, that could be a clothing brand, maybe not automotive, but certain brands where you get a celebrity associated with it. And then if you take that celebrity who happens to be an athlete, they want to own what that person's promoting. And I think if you look at the influencer market, and you look at some of and I know a company that's launching a commerce business and using liquor as one of the categories because they're celebrities, whether it's Ryan Williams or someone associated with that brand, and you put that out there, all of a sudden the sales go through the roof. So I think but what's going to be the challenge is, this can't turn into a home shopping channel. It's how you elegantly deliver through a phone and on your screen. A simple thing pops up, says, do you want to purchase something? And if you hit a red button, it disappears. If it's green, you can pop off and buy the jersey or a ball or whatever it is from that team, or potentially where you live, a liquor, the tequila or vodka or something that someone's associated with. So I think those things, there's gonna be a lot of trial and error. There can be a lot of failures, but I think that's one of the things. The other thing to think about is the betting. Right here in the U.S., this country's been a little bit slower to adopt that for a bunch of different reasons, and probably good reasons. But other countries, as you know, it's another form of revenue. And anyone who's got content, particularly in the sports arena, is looking for new revenue streams to try and improve their profitability.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think about other formats in comparison to sport over OTT? So if you look at kind of theatrical, documentaries, news, from your experience and from the organizations you've worked for, do you think certain formats work better in that OTT direct-to-consumer format than others? Is there a difference in the ability to monetize them? What's your posture on that, Greg?
Well, it's interesting. News is interesting in that news is, now with whether it's social networks or all sort of forms of networks, depending on your demographic, a lot of the news people are getting right off their phone, right before they even sit down in front of a flat screen and watch the nightly news whenever they watch that. But I think it is all the devices to enable that to get out there, and then it's the channels behind that, or the aggregators of news who put that out there, or is that X, or is that whatever form that news is coming out. And I think there's going to continue to be a debate around news and how it's delivered. But there's no question there's more access to news today, no matter where you live in the world, than you've ever had before. It's finding the right source. But I think for talk briefly about fast channels and entertainment. I think fast channels is to some degree the next, I don't want to call it the replacement, because linear will be here for a long time. And I always make the analogy back to, there was radio, black and white, broadcast, cable, digital, internet. Broadcast is still here, and particularly in some parts of the world, it's a key player in the marketplace. But I do think that streaming will diminish those other services. And if you look at fast channels, which are free advertised supported TV networks, if you love watching a certain show on Nickelodeon or even on MTV or on A&E network, you can find that single channel around that title and binge watch. You are watching with ads, but people are okay with that. They've always watched with broadcast, and some people have no issue with that. If you want to pay up and get it without ads, that's a different story. But those channels are, I think that part of the market is growing. It's innovative. It's got a long ways to go, because some of them are doing a great job of delivering ads, some are not. The experiences, it varies. But that's part of the innovative part of television, is that consumers, if you're of an income bracket where you can't afford to buy all these subscription services, you can get Pluto, or you can get one of these fast channels that bulk it together, and you can watch, as long as you've got a broadband or some sort of signal and a screen, you can watch all day long.
Yeah, fast fascinates me, Greg, because I was having lunch with someone who had worked for NBC, head of content acquisition, for 13 years today. And we ended up having this conversation, same one that we're having now. And he was saying, it's funny how the pendulum swings, Chris, because really fast is the reiteration of what linear was and how the broadcasters monetize that. The difference, and this is what we were debating, the difference is obviously a point that you made earlier, Greg, around the access to data that we've got now. I'd like to talk a little bit around your opinion on that, because to me, that's the game changer. There's some amazing companies in this space. Jump, data-driven analytics out of Spain, Convivo, big in this space. But, the thing that fascinates me, Greg, is that I'm still not convinced that organizations, although they're collecting that data, that they're totally sure how to use it, either on the analytical front or employing it for greater revenue streams. What have you seen and what's your opinion?
Well, I agree 100% with that statement, which is there's more data than ever before. Companies, if you're a broadcaster or a media company, struggles with the use of data and whether that data is around their workflow and the creation and publishing of content, how to effectively use that, to the actual data, they get the usage data. And there's enormous amounts. I mean, Comcast and Charter with all their set-top boxes and devices is collecting enormous amounts of data. Now, whether you're on a phone or a browser, if you're a content company, you're getting enormous amounts of data. They're using a very small percentage of it. The challenge, and I think that's where not only data and AI will help to better analyze that data and to create, whether it's next best action or whether it's a recommendation. But if you think about it, people today still struggle whether if you go into a connected TV or if you're on linear television or even on your phone, what do I watch? And still, the number one is, what did your friend tell you to watch and recommend versus what's coming through to you? And there's some privacy issues and there's issues in different countries of what you can do and can't do. But to me, that's an area of opportunity for innovation, because if you can help more effectively deliver to a household, and as you know, most services, when you log in, is it, the parent, the child, who's logging in, what are the controls? So you do have a sense of who's watching and what and where and why, but there is so much data and no one's sort of figured out the magic solution to that. I think there's a lot of work being done to try and figure that out. But, people now, the problem with streaming, they'll watch Yellowstone, it ends, they'll drop the service, shift over here to watch this show, where they need to find, if you like Yellowstone, you should like this, and do that very effectively. And they don't today. There's a little bit of that, and there's money being spent against that, but that's a huge opportunity, and not just for television, but for usage of any digital device to help deliver a better experience for the consumer.
Yeah. It leads us really nicely onto the key topic to talk about today, Greg, and you just mentioned it, innovation. I think data for me is the game changer. We're talking now about how it's used, how it's employed. I think there's two things that I see, Greg. Tell me what you think about this. I think the legacy associated to broadcasting and adoption of new technologies is highly influenced by the reticence to use it too quickly, because if a viewing experience is eroded, that's catastrophic, right? That's not acceptable in broadcasting. So whereas other industries might go, well, try it, let's do the beta trial with a higher appetite for risk when it comes to the consequences of failure, in broadcasting, it's not really an option, right? People have paid their subs or they've got their license fee in the UK or whatever. The impact of that could be catastrophic for the brand. But now, the thing that accentuates that is there's all of these things that the industry could do. You mentioned AI before, data, AI, deep learning, product personification. I think the industry is a little bit like, reticent is a diplomatic word to describe what I feel when I talk to lots of people around the world in broadcasting and see the lack of traction that there is on adopting and engineering innovation. Do you see the same thing, Greg? Am I a lonely voice here, or do you think there's more that broadcasting could be doing to help itself accelerate into innovation rather than kind of tiptoe towards it?
I think it's interesting. I think on one hand, they can do more. On the other hand, the economic model is that innovation, if it provides a better experience and it results in reducing churn and extending your viewership, those are the key goals they want, right? But if you provide, the ability to understand the show and deliver something that is helpful to that audience, absolutely. But at the same time, they're holding back on the investment to some degree because of the need to get to profitability. There's also a lot of disruption in the industry now because there have been so many shifts and so many layoffs. I compare the media business to the real estate business in commercial real estate, which was really hit by COVID. Everyone came out hiring like crazy coming out of COVID for the media business and OTT business. And we need to buy the subscribers. Disney Plus hadn't been around that long. It's grown like crazy. Peacock, all these new, there was a quick pivot. It was coming, but this is where the pendulum swung. And then they had to slow down those investments because they realized, Wall Street doesn't like it when you keep losing billions and billions of dollars. So I think there's that battle of a couple of things. It's the innovation around using AI and data to deliver a better experience. So it's an ever-changing model, and there's struggles to go against both things.
Yeah, maybe I'm countering my own posture on the debate here, but I attended the Broadcast Pro Summit in Dubai a couple of weeks ago, and there's a guy called Peter Van Dam, who is the prolific chief technology officer for Saudi broadcasting companies, who are obviously big on sport. And I hadn't actually realized until I heard Peter speaking on stage at the panel that AI is already extensively used in broadcasting, kind of behind the scenes. Maybe it's not for the stuff we're talking about that's more front end, direct to consumer, but actually in the editing, production, virtualization. Peter said to me, Chris, do you know what? By the time a football game ends, via the use of AI, we've already made 630 of the most prolific clippings that are going to be used from that game. We sell those packages and we use them across our own social media as well. I was blown away, Greg. Like the fact that AI is doing that, following the players, knowing what.
Yep, you're muted.
There you go. Sorry, Greg.
No worries.
I was absolutely blown away by what Peter said to me when he said that, the AI behind the scenes is actually helping to alleviate some of the production costs. And if you look at virtualization as well, OB vans, the outside broadcast trucks that we used to be familiar with sitting outside stadiums, they're an ecological nightmare. They mean that the guys and girls who have to work in them spend all weekend, every weekend away from home. Some of them might have enjoyed that, but that's their own personal decision. But, people don't want to do that now. You just mentioned COVID and hybrid working. People are the same, and they've got the opportunity to do the production and the commentary and all that sort of stuff from home. So maybe it is more evident in the industry than I'm talking about on the D2C side.
It absolutely is. And I think COVID, and now the new hybrid work environment that we all sort of live in, definitely not only impacted viewership, but affected production of content in like a lot of jobs. And if you look at the Olympics, for example, in NBC, there's one coming up, but the last one, the number of people who were on site versus back in the studio in Connecticut, because they're predominantly in Stanford and New York and other places, a higher percentage of the actual production people are back, sitting in a studio or a facility somewhere in the States, not on site, because of the transformation. You look at the companies that are delivering, without naming a whole bunch of brands, that you can deliver a digital workflow without having all this physical hardware on site, right? It's all being done in the cloud, and it's getting better and better in terms of how you produce these. You still need cameras. You still need to get that out of the facility, and a lot of the facilities are getting better because they've got broadband, they've got connectivities, you've got new stadiums, or you've got satellites to get it, however you get it out, depending where you are. But I think the cost to produce is also going down. The expectation is higher because you're expecting this incredible experience, but the actual cost, because a lot of it's being driven in the cloud And whether that's GCP or Azure or IBM or AWS or Alibaba or what cloud, where is this running? That can be easier, faster. You talk about AI and automation. When I was at IBM, the US Open tennis, every year we were getting better and better. You're watching a match. That match ended. The clips were available to see the best points of that match. That was all automation. That wasn't someone sitting back there editing. And that's just getting better and better and better. And that's true not just in sports, but also in other. If you want to see the clips from a major news event, all of a sudden they're up there to see those without having to watch the whole show. So it's also the delivering of content. You think about the libraries and the materials that studios have. Well, now they can use AI to go in, find me the photographs, the images, the likeness to Ryan, or whoever, whatever actor. Boom, it pulls it up. It's not someone going in, looking and searching. You can do these things so much faster. And you think of a news organization, who many news organizations still do. They'll create stories around someone who's very important, or maybe getting close to their passing, and they want to have that ready for when that former president passes, right? Well, you want to create that, whatever that story may be, but you can more easily use AI to pull that more rapidly and get that story out faster than your competitor can.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me is a thought that I have on a daily basis, Greg, around something that I love about broadcast and media, which is the symbiotic nature of so many of the organizations and technologies that exist. You've got kind of turnkey providers. I'm not sure that they do themselves that much of a favor when they position themselves as a turnkey provider, because the organizations that I see thriving through the economic oscillations are generally the ones that do something really well. And all of the entities surrounding them know that they're the best, so gravitate towards them when they're creating a solution for whatever it might be. So, and you're talking about all that. I mean, just touching on media asset management and being able to pull from a repository and generate those kind of clips of a former president in your example, great example. Greg, we're coming to the top of the half an hour that this episode will be. So I want to give you the opportunity to just give some final words on what do you think is going to happen over the next couple of years? Things are obviously going to keep accelerating, but how fast? And do you think there's going to be any distinct milestones in what we should watch out for?
Thank you. And I appreciate it. This has been very much enjoyed doing this and speaking with you. I think the next couple of years, there's going to continue to be consolidation in the marketplace. And depending on where you are in the world and the delivery of that content, there's consolidation in terms of content being created. Some of the contracts were just finally negotiated. The strikes are over, so the content's being back to being created and produced. What that's also driving is going to drive prices up. There was just some pricing announced recently. And I think you're hitting a point now where consumers are frustrated with pricing and the value prop. When streaming really kicked off 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, it was less expensive than your traditional linear. Now it's on par. So all of a sudden the value prop is being put into question. But I think when you look at the big guys, the Amazons, the Alphabets, those guys have deep pockets and ability to compete, for example, for sports rights. I mean, NBA, where's that going to go? 10 years ago, if someone said the NFL would be on Amazon Prime, people go, no, that'll never happen. It's happened. And they're doing a decent job. They had some issues when they started, but they're doing a good job. So where do those sports go? Where do some of those movies go? You've seen studios being acquired by Prime and by Netflix. Will that continue? I think it potentially could. I think the traditional media companies are at risk. They deliver and create amazing content. They've got great libraries, but you're battling the big guys. And depending on where you are in the globe, you've got to have the right partnership and the right distribution, the right mix of content. I think in terms of innovation, it has to be about using data and AI to not only improve the way you create, produce, and distribute your content, but then on the consumer side, how you deliver a better experience. What can you bring to that offering that makes it more interesting and more engaging? Is it commerce? Is it in sports? Is it betting and done in the right elegant way that keeps that person more engaged? Why do I want to go watch something on Fox Sports versus CSPN? What's the story? You know, is it the sport or is there a better experience? So I think, you know, the consumer, I'd like to say they'll win in this, but I think right now with all the confusion in streaming, consumers don't even know how to, you know, some consumers, if you think about older audiences or folks who don't understand how to use the connected TV effectively, there's got to be education and then how you bundle things to make it easier for certain consumers to get access to it. But all those are opportunities for content companies and for distributors to grow and evolve.
And we didn't even touch on the writer's strike and the ripples, the effects that that's had on the industry, especially in the US. Greg, I want to wrap up by, you know, making a professional but personal comment as well. The career that you've got is an amazing one. It's been a pleasure to start this series talking to you. You speak from such a position of authority and gravity about everything that we've touched on, and you've earned the right to do so. So, Greg Willis, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you on episode 1 of the OTTRED Spotlight podcast. Thank you so much.
Well, Chris, thank you. Very much enjoy and always enjoy connecting with you. So love the conversation.
Thanks, Greg.
All right. Cheers.